Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, November 19th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new poll from Marist University showing the Democratic Party with a massive 14-point lead nationwide over the Republicans going into the next year of the 2026 midterm elections. This brand new polls from Marist University throws everything awry when it comes down to how we've understood our generic ballot numbers for quite some time. This 14-point lead is absolutely massive, and one that does show the Democratic Party is arguably in a tremendously good position going into the next midterms, as they are set to take place over the coming weeks and months through primaries and, of course, the inevitable general election in November of 2026. Now, this number is one that jumps out. I usually don't make videos talking about individual polls on the generic ballot front. I generally am talking about trend lines that we are seeing in the overall average, how the presidential approval rating plays into it, how perception around Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer plays into it. And all of these things obviously matter, but very rarely am I actually breaking down a substantive enough number point that says that this data from Marist University is so important that we need to talk about it, because this number is astronomical. Now, to give you a bit of context of this data that they've released, this is the first general election poll that they've released of the cycle. They are showing Democrats with an astonishing 14-point advantage at 55% support nationwide. Republicans, on the other hand, are at just 41%. And they call back to the last time they did this survey back in November of 2024, when they found that the American public was roughly evenly divided, 48% to 48%. Republicans would go on to win that popular vote by roughly 3 percentage points. And so the reason why, I think it's worth noting is, one, yes, Marist University in 2024 did underestimate Republican support by roughly 3 points, but even applying that to the data that they've released today really goes to show that an 11-point advantage could potentially be the baseline for the Democratic Party. But the last time that Marist University did a poll was in a midterm cycle was in 2022, when they found data that right before the election, when you take a look at it, they joined the same as they do now with the NPR and PBS. They said Republicans would win the national popular vote by roughly 3 points. On election day, Republicans won by 3. And so when you think about exactly what they had foretold in the past, predicted in the past, their data was 100% accurate in 2022. And when it came down to 2024, they were only off by 3 points. Being generous to the GOP, if you were to apply both of those shifts, you'd be off by an average of roughly 1.5%, and on the worst case, the upper bounds of a margin of error, which only finds itself to be at around 3.5 points. Meaning that the Republican Party, at least in this sample, in this survey, in this poll, finds itself in a tremendously poor position going into 2026. And it's something that isn't necessarily as shocking coming off the 2025 elections, but absolutely leaves a lot of lessons to be learned for Republicans nationwide. Now, to think back about any time that Democrats even got to the double digits when it came down to this popular vote margin, you have to go back to 2008, an election where Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats won 257 seats on the national stage with 53.2% of the vote. The Marist University poll is saying that Democrats would actually outperform this by roughly 2 points. But remembering back, right now, Democrats have just 215 seats in the United States House of Representatives. In 2008, again, remember that number, Republicans had just 178 and Democrats had 257. This map was arguably more blue than it was red, which is in direct contrast with what you see today, Republicans dominating in many other parts of the country, especially relative to 2008. But the point is that that election, with Democrats winning nationally by 11 points, resulted in Democrats controlling full-on statewide delegations in states that hadn't voted for the Democratic Party in decades, for instances. In states like North Carolina, the Democrats had the advantage here. They won it in the presidential, but this was a massive victory. 2 years later, they would go on to lose it in many of these seats, and then 2 years after that, Republicans would dominate and draw them out of existence in the state. But taking a look at that difference, right, so much more red than there was blue in 2008, because the popular vote circumstances were that dramatically different. In 2010, Republicans won nationally by roughly 6 points, which shows that the comparison between 2010 and 2008 is largely accounted for in that shift when it comes down to the national popular vote. And the generic ballot data at the time was roughly in line with what you saw. When you take a look at the polling, let's see if we can actually get here. I'm sure we can if we go down the rabbit hole of the Real Clear Politics websites. I'm hoping that they pull it up for us. I guess we aren't going to be able to find it for 2008, unfortunately. Maybe when we looked at this data a long time ago, I'm sure we can find it as we continue to go through it. But the point is that, when you take a look at what the generic ballot data had told and said to us about this race, it was that Democrats in 2008 were going to demolish nationwide. They were going to do super well. They were going to be able to win, a number of seats across the country, and that their popular vote margin was roughly in line with that of Barack Obama's victory, but Democrats actually outperformed it in the generic ballot. And so while I don't think that Marist University is 100% accurate in their data point, I do think they're underestimating Republican support quite a bit. I don't think you're going to see Democrats win by 14 points. I do think, though, that you can find yourself acknowledging that while this might be an outlier, also serves to be that even in acknowledgement that it is an outlier, there still are methodologies that you can trust about this, data that you can trust from it. And while we shouldn't be going out here and saying Democrats are guaranteed to win by a double-digit margin nationwide, it does make it more and more possible in that it is capturing sentiment amongst even groups of voters that find themselves backing the Democrats by such a significant amount. And to make matters better for Marist University, which again probably acknowledges that this is a massive, outlier poll that they are releasing, you can also find, too, that in some of the data that we just saw released today from Marquette University out of the state of Wisconsin, in their press release, they find that amongst likely voters, Democrats are winning likely voters nationwide by roughly 8 points. And so that difference there certainly is, substantial enough that it shows that while it may not be 14 points, it absolutely is significant enough that it makes a difference and shows that Democrats have the ability to win many of these states and many of these districts in 2026 because of their expansive advantage amongst different groups of voters. And while all registered voters are saying that, they are backing the Democratic Party, of those who say who they are certain to vote, that's the number where the 8-point margin comes in. Actually, it's 9 points here, seemingly. I did the math on that wrong. Oh, no, it's 8 points. No, it's 9 points. I'm arguing with myself, but it's 3 plus 6, so it's 9 points. The point is, though, that you are getting closer and closer to the possibility of a double-digit national popular vote victory, similar to what we saw in 2025 in the elections that took place 2 weeks ago on the national stage. And that would be not just an improvement for Democrats, obviously, relative to 2024, but an overperformance relative to 2018 and potentially something on par with that of 2008. And looking at the amount of seats the Democrats won in 2008, it truly is incomprehensible. And to put it in actual visual terms, this 2008 map is stunning for the Democrats, but the 2024 map is far more red. But let's talk about what it would look like if Republicans were to see that on the national stage, all of a sudden their, Republican +3 national victory is turned into Democrats winning by 14 points. Now, again, need to point this out. This is not my prediction. This is not how I'm saying the race is going to go. I am merely experimenting with what the map would look like under this circumstance, but you would be accounting for a 17-point shift on the national stage. And as seemingly impossible as that seems, when you look back at 2008, for instance, I think this is a great example of just how dynamic American elections can really get. Look at the difference between, blue and red. So much more red across the country, but when it comes down to the national popular vote, when you look at 2008, Democrats won nationally between the two candidates here, between the two parties, by roughly 10.6%. That was, the difference on the national stage. Republicans were at 42.6, Democrats were at 53.2. That is a 10.6% difference nationwide. In 2010, Republicans won the national popular vote, 51.7 to 44.9. Effectively, the difference here is that what you're finding is that there's about a 7-point difference. So averaging and rounding, you are talking an 18-point swing from 2008 to 2010 on the national level, and that explains why this map goes from so much blue to so much red. And so getting back to this swing, 17 points, would actually be slightly less than that of the Tea Party movement that ushered out Democratic governance and in a new wave of Republicans in Washington, D.C. And so we can take a look. this shift here on the national stage in favor of the Democrats by 17% would end up with Democrats at 263 seats in the House of Representatives. And get this, some of these GOP gerrymanders would be so powerful that they still prohibit Democrats making any more than one gain in Florida, no gains in Georgia, 0 in North Carolina. It is really quite fascinating. Or two, 1 in North Carolina. It really is just so interesting how well these gerrymanders hold up under all of it, because you remember that 2008 map. It's far more blue than you might think, right? So much blue across the board, but still Democrats are getting more seats here. The point is, though, that what you take a look at on this map and what you see in terms of these designated numbers show just how great that advantage would be for Democrats if the Marist University poll was in fact correct. And it would usher in Democrats into a position in many of these districts that would really jeopardize the Republican Party's ability to govern in the final 2 years of Donald Trump's administration. And it arguably is what Democrats did in 2006 when they won nationally by roughly 8 points. After 2004, Republicans defeated the Democrats by roughly 3 to 4 points. This in and of itself was about a 10-11 point swing, which could be what we see in 2026. And this was the year that Democrats were able to cut out Republicans from the House majority. But again, thinking about, just this data point and how it adds into the overall average that we've been working with on the 2026 level, it doesn't skew it too tremendously. After all, Marist is just one poll out of 10 plus that are included in this Real Clear Politics average, but it does tell us a very fascinating story about where the race stands today. That although they may not be 100% accurate, they were in 2022, and it will be of interest to track as we go from point to point. When we look at polls and how they've changed their stances and their positioning for the Democratic Party, it has actually gone on the up and up when it comes down to generic congressional vote. When you take a look at that data from roughly a month ago, at this point, October 19th, 2025, Democrats led by just 1.9%. Today, they lead by 5. These are real changes that you can see tangibly on the graphic, where you're finding not just a minor bump, but a practical skyrocket in terms of support, that the Democratic Party's margin over the GOP has over doubled in a matter of a month. And while I don't think that you are going to see that pattern continue, after all, in November of 2026, Democrats are not winning nationally by, 500%, but you are going to find, apologies, I just dropped my pen, but you are going to find that the Democratic Party's margin on the generic congressional vote could very well improve. And this past month alone has been a phenomenal example of that. That Democrats that, sure, ways ago were not doing so well when it came down to how the nation perceived them, are finding themselves really improving. And are finding that even as there is still a large amount of discontent for Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and Democrats across the board on the national stage, a lot of that has to do with the Democratic Party's own base saying that they want younger, more robust, more fighting leadership in Washington, D.C., rather than a disaffected party base that is unwilling to vote. Because every single election we have seen since Donald Trump has taken office has proven to us that Democrats will vote, has proven to us that Democrats are the ones that are paying attention to that random municipal election, that are paying attention to that random county executive race, that are paying attention to that December Tennessee's 7th District congressional race. Because for Democrats, every election, something is on the line. Pushing back against the president, finding a way to advocate for the positions and the beliefs that the Democratic Party embodies. And even as Democrats may be upset with the current status of Democratic leadership, the data reveals in and of itself that Democrats are getting 95% of their own party vote. The same exact data will tell us that Democrats are unpopular, especially relative to where they were 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 16 years ago. Democrats are at a record low in terms of party affiliation, party respect and party approval. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they will lose in 2026. Because Republicans are even in an even worse position amongst independents and a lot of swing voters nationwide, especially those who pay attention and will vote in November of 2026. And this data from the Marist poll out of Marist University is really damning for the Republican Party nationwide and likely foretells an incredibly tumultuous next year and midterm cycle that will likely oust Republicans all across this nation. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.